Hey guys, in today's video I'm going to share a simple landing page with a travel theme that I built using React. So let's take a look at what I'm going to share today. Here we have our main section with a nav bar on top, and when we scroll down we have an on-scroll animation with these slider components. The application is also responsive, so as I'll show here, if we change the window size, the UI is responsive to that, as we see in the nav bar up here, as well as the sliders down here. Cool, so first let's get started with our setup. The first thing we're going to do is open terminal. I'm going to type the command npx create react app, and you can title this whatever you want. For this video I'm going to title it React Landing Page V1, and we'll wait for that to complete. So now that that's done, I'm going to navigate into that folder and open VS Code. So before we get started, we're going to install some packages, and I'll share that right now. So first we're going to install React icons. So we can copy this command right here. And the next one we're going to install is called React Intersection Observer, and this is going to help us with the on-scroll animation, as we saw earlier right here with this effect. So we'll install this and then discuss it in greater detail later. Next we'll be using some Google fonts for this. So in particular I have two fonts here, Montserrat and Monte Carlo, that I like, so we're going to go ahead and import this to our React app. So once we select the one we want, as indicated here, we're going to copy these links and import it into the head of the HTML. So if we see in our source, in our public rather, we have our index.html, and we're just going to copy that. So let me go ahead and grab the other one as well. Great, now we're set up, so we can go ahead and write npm start. Awesome, so now that we have our setup, we can start coding. So the first thing I'm going to do is just apply some basic styles to the app.css. So right now we can get rid of all this. And here what I'm going to use is box sizing, border box, and just apply some margin and padding. And for the font family, I'm going to have the default one as Montserrat. So if we go back and take a look, we can use this right here. There we go. And I'm just going to remove what we don't need inside our app. Cool, so now we just have an empty app, and we'll get started. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is just make some folders. So I'll make an assets folder, and this is just going to hold our images. And we'll also make a components folder. For the images, you can go ahead and grab any images you like. I've already taken some. So just import those first. And the first component we'll make is our hero section, which is the main section that we saw right here. We'll make this first. So I'm going to call it hero.js, and I'll also make the corresponding CSS file for that. And let's start coding this section. So for this component, I'm going to have it take an image URL as a prop. And I'm just going to apply a basic class name to this div. And inside, all it's going to have is an image, as well as a h1. So first, I'll just apply the image source that's being passed in. For alt, we'll just give it a basic travel. And for the class name, we'll call this hero image. And lastly, for the big text that we had, we'll put a h1 and give this a class name of hero title. And for our text, we'll just call this travel made simple. Awesome, so now let's apply some styling. I'll first import the hero.css file. So for the main hero div, I'm going to give this a position relative, width of 100%, and a height of 100 VH, so that this takes basically the entire viewport. Next, for the image, I'm going to have this a width of 100%, height 100%, and object fit of cover. This part is important because it makes us keep the same aspect ratio of the image and it doesn't distort it. And the position, we'll give it an absolute position. So with this absolute positioning, I'm going to position it close to the bottom right of this main hero div. For the text color, I'll just give it white and the font size of 4 rem. And lastly, a padding of 15 pixels. Cool. So now that we made this hero component, we can go ahead and use it in our app. The first thing though is that I'll import the images from the assets folder. Oops. I'll do this for the other images as well. We should also go ahead and import the hero component that we just made. I'm just going to fix a small error I had here. And there we go. Right now we have our main hero section here. So next up, what we can do is create our slider component. So we'll start building this component right here. I'll call this slider, and I'll also make the corresponding CSS file. Now for this component, what I'm going to make it take as props is an image source, a title, a subtitle, and flipped. This flipped boolean is just going to tell us if the image will be on the left or on the right, like so. So here we have two different versions, one where the image is on the left and one where it's on the right. So here I'll just apply a class name of slider to this main div, and inside here I'm gonna make a function called render content. So let's go ahead and make that function right now. So the first thing we're going to do is determine if it's flipped. And for now I'll just return an empty fragment. Cool. So now let's place our actual content here. So the first thing is that if it's not flipped, we'll place the image first. So let's give it the source that we passed in. And let's give it a class name of slider image. The next thing we're going to have is a div that contains the title and the subtitle. So if I go back here, we're going to have this will be the main title and then some smaller text in here to give greater information. So I'm going to make a div that wraps both the title and the subtitle. And for this container, I'll just call it slider content. And then inside here, I'll have a h1 with a class name of slider title. And inside, we're going to place the title that we passed in as a prop. And we'll do the similar thing for the subtitle. Now, if it's not flipped, we'll basically be doing this. We'll basically be returning this exact same thing. Only difference is that the text will be placed before the image. So now that we have all our content here, we'll apply some styling to it. So let's first import the CSS so we don't forget. Next, in our slider CSS, we'll apply some basic styling. So for the display of the main container, I'm going to use flex and align items center with margin of 20 pixels. For the slider image, I'm going to apply a width of 60%. And for the content, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give it a flex of 1. And what this will do is allow it to take up the remaining space that's not being taken up by the image. Now this is also going to have a display of flex for the inner content, which is the title and the subtitle. So if we just go back, this is basically the container, and we're going to use a flex to position these two items here. So for flex direction, we're going to have this as a column. We're going to justify the content in the center, align items as well in the center, padding of 20 pixels, and text align center. Next, for the slider title, I'll just give this also a text align of center. And there we go, we should be able to use this now inside our app. So let's go ahead and import that. And now I'll go ahead and make two slider components. So what we have to pass in is some props. So the first thing for the image source, I'll pass in the second travel photo that I imported. For the title, I'll also give it some basic text, be an explorer, and same thing here for the subtitle. I'll give some text, you can put whatever you want here. Cool. So we'll copy this as well for the next one, and we'll change a few things around. So for the image source, we'll give it the third image. The title, we'll change this. Your dream vacation is only a few clicks away. Nice. And now the last thing we're going to apply for this one is remember that flipped property we had. So I'm going to pass this in, and let's see what we get. So if we scroll down, nice, we have both slider components. I'm just going to fix something that an error I had in the beginning. So instead of applying this style to the app, I'm going to apply it to everything. So now we shouldn't see any spacing like there that we had. Cool, so things are looking good. The only thing now is that we don't have an on-scroll animation for these sliders. When we scroll down, it's just static like so. But what we discussed earlier is we're going to use the React Intersection Observer API. And what this helps us with is telling us when an element enters or leaves the viewport. So if you look at the documentation here, they provide some examples. So let's copy this and discuss it later. We'll put this in our slider, and let's also not forget to include our import. So we're using this use in view here, and we're taking the ref and the in view, and let's go see what exactly this means. So what they discuss on this in this library is that the ref allows us to monitor a DOM element, and the in view tells us the status of that DOM element, if it's in the viewport or not. So what we could do now is apply this ref to this slider component right here. So let's go ahead and do that. Now that we've applied this ref, we're tracking when it enters or leaves the viewport. For the threshold, I'm going to put a value of 0.4. So here what they discuss is a number between 0 and 1 indicating the percentage that should be visible before triggering. So for this video, I'm just going to use a value of 40%, 0.4. And next, what we can do is use the in view right here. So when it's in view, what we can do is change our class name here to create that simple zoom effect that we had. Let's first create, let's add some styling first. So when we just have our basic slider class, we'll give it an opacity of 0, and we'll transform this down to 85%. And we'll give it a transition of 2 seconds. And now we'll create a separate class that will apply in addition to all this. So when this gets applied, we'll give it an opacity of 1. We'll transform it back to its full dimensions, and transition of 2 seconds. So to use this, we'll have in this class name is first we'll check if the in view is set to true, and if so, we'll apply both of these class names. Otherwise, we'll just give it the slider without that zoom class name. Cool, so let's see what we have now. Let's scroll down, and here we go. We have our OnScroll animation where we started with an opacity of 0, and a scaled down dimension of 85%, and over 2 seconds, when we scroll into this view, it scales up to 100% of its dimensions and an opacity of 1. Awesome, so now we'll move on to creating our nav bar that I showed at the beginning of our video. So let's head back here, In our components, we'll make a new file, navbar.js and navbar.css. We'll also be using some React icons that we installed earlier. In particular, the ones we're going to use are the menu right here and the X icon. And I'm going to use these feather icons. So let's go ahead and import those. FI menu and FIX are the names of those icons, and we'll import from React icons/fi. Again, we'll also import our CSS file so we don't forget. Cool. So now let's get working on our nav bar here. I'll replace this div with a nav. And inside, what we'll do is that we'll pass in Navbar Links. So for this, we'll have something like this. We'll give it an array of objects where each one has something like a URL. This could be something like /home and something like a title that we display, like home, like so. So for now, I'll just comment this out. And in here, what we're gonna do is we're gonna loop through these Navbar links, and for each one, what we're gonna do is we're gonna render a list item with an anchor tag. So first, let's wrap this in a UL. So for each list item, we'll also have an anchor tag. Let's apply some basic class names. This will call this navbar item, navbar link, and for the main nav, we'll call this navbar, and for the unordered list, we'll call this navbar list. There we go. And for now, let's pass in our href. So for this, we'll give it item.url, as we said here. And for the text that we're going to display, we'll just give it the item.title, as we discussed up here earlier. So it's important to note that since we're rendering a list of things, React expects a unique key. So for this, we can give it the item.title, assuming that we'll be passing in unique titles. So now that we have a basic navbar set up, let's go ahead and apply some styles. So first thing, for the navbar, we're going to give it a position of sticky, so that this way when we scroll down the page, that navbar will still be visible. For top, we'll give it 0 pixels. Give this a height of 70 pixels. Background color of black. And we'll give it an opacity of 0.75. Display flex. And to justify the content, we'll do space between. And the reason we're going to do that is because we'll also have inside here a span with just our logo name. So I'll just call this, you can call this whatever you want to call it, and we'll call this, for our class name, we'll give it Navbar logo. And when we use space between, we'll basically maximize the space between these two children component we have here, so the span and the list. Align items, we'll do center, and we'll apply some padding. So I'll do 0 pixels, 30. For the margin bottom, I'm going to give this a minus 70 pixel margin, so that this way the nav bar can be on top of the other content, like so, like we have here. So if I get back to this, I'll also give this a Z index of 5 just so we have some elevation. And next, let's style our Navbar logo. I'll give this a color of white. Font family. For this, I'm going to use the Monte Carlo. Remember, this is the one that we imported earlier from Google Fonts, right here. And font size of 2.5 rem. Next, let's style the navbar list. So this UL right here, let's style that. I'm going to give this a display of flex and list style none. Next, let's do the individual LI list items. I'm going to apply a white space no wrap so that we don't have a wrap to a new line. Next, let's have a Navbar, Navbar Links. Let's give this a font size of 0.85 rem. Text decoration, none. Color, I'll give this white. Text align, center, padding 10 pixels. Margin. For the border style, we're going to apply a solid border, and we're going to give it a border width of 0 pixels, 0 pixels, 1 pixel. So for this little navbar, we'll have this little effect where when we hover on it, we'll only display a line under it with that border. So for the border color, we'll make it transparent for now. Give this a transition of 250 milliseconds. We'll apply the Navbar link hover. So here we had the border color transparent, but when we hover over it, we'll give it a color white. Cool, so now in our app.js, let's go ahead and make those navbar links first. For the URL, I'm just going to put this hashtag, and this is just signifying that it's a placeholder URL. And title, I'll give this one home, and I'll make 2 more links. This, I'll title this one trips, and the next one rewards. Now let's import our navbar. First, I'm just going to fix a issue I had here. So this should be React icons, just a small typo. And it's compiling again. And now let's create our actual navbar component in the app.js. And let's pass in the navbar links. This is, I'm going to fix an error I had in navbar.css, so this should be not justify self, this should be justify content. And when we open this up, there we go. So now we have our navbar, and when we hover over each item, we have a little underline border for each one. So for an actual application, for each one we have actual links, but since we're focusing on the landing page, it's okay for the scope of this project. Next is that, so we have everything working essentially. We have the landing page, and when we scroll down, we have an OnScroll effect. But what we don't have right now is great responsiveness. If we adjust the size of this window, it looks a bit odd. This isn't that great, and on mobile it wouldn't look that great either. This will kind of be all squished up here, and this as well. So in this part, what we're going to do is work on our responsiveness of the UI. So first, let's work on our navbar. So what we'll do is we're going to use state and create something like this menu here, where once we reach a certain width, we'll display a menu like this rather than how we had it over here. And we'll have state so that we know if this is clicked, we'll change the style of this so that to make these items visible. So let's work on that first. So first, what I'm going to do is have a menu clicked and set menu clicked, and I'll use the useState hook, and we'll initialize this to false. So just to recap, that what this will do is determine if the menu icon is clicked or not, and we should also keep in mind that this icon is only visible when the window width is small. And I'll create a little function here, toggle menu click. And what this will do is just simply set this to the opposite of what it was. So when we call this, if it was clicked, if it was true, it'll set it to false, and if it was false, it'll set it to true when we call this method. Next up, let's display our icon because we don't have that yet. So we'll use this menu clicked state that we just created, and if the menu was clicked, then what we'll show is the X icon, but if it wasn't clicked, we'll show the menu icon. So let's go ahead and use these icons. For size, we'll just give it a size of 25. Class name of Navbar menu. And on click, we'll give this an on click of the toggle menu on click that we just created. So this, we'll just change this to FI menu. So using this operator, we'll check if this is true, we're going to return this, the FIX icon. Otherwise, if it's false, if it's not clicked, we're going to show the menu icon. We're going to apply some styling. Cursor pointer. And as we can see right here, we have that icon, and it changes depending on if it's clicked or not. But we only want to display this when the window reaches a certain small width. So we gotta apply some styling to reflect that. So here for the display, we'll have none by default. What we'll do is that when the window reaches a certain width, we'll apply some special styles. So for the navbar menu, we'll make the display visible once this happens. So let's try that. So now this goes away, but if we make it smaller, there we go, it becomes visible again right here. And now let's apply some other styling. So at the beginning we showed this where we had this effect where the list items would display in a column. So let's go ahead and style this. So first thing, we'll style the navbar list. And we'll give this a display of flex when we reach this width. For flex direction, we said we want it to be column. Justify content, we'll give this space evenly. Align items center. For position, we're going to give this an absolute positioning. From the top, we're going to give it 70 pixels because remember the height of the navbar is 70 pixels. And initially, we're going to give this left of minus 100% so that it's not visible. And we want this to take up the entire width of the screen, so we'll give it a width of 100% width of 100% of the parent. height 300 pixels. And transition, we'll give this all 0.5 seconds. Now, for the navbar list, we'll apply an active state. We'll have a navbar list active where we give it a left of 0 instead of minus 100%. Next, we'll style some other stuff. We'll style the navbar item. We'll give this a width of 100%. Display a flex. Justify content center. Align items center. Border radius of 0 and a flex of 1, so that takes up the remaining space. Next, we'll have the navbar link styling. Give this a display of flex, height 100%, width 100%, justify content, center, align items center, margin 0 pixels, border width 0 pixels, background color black, and opacity of 0.75. So now, when we want hover on this link, as we showed before, we want something that makes it darker, so we can increase the opacity of that. So let's go ahead and apply that. So navbar link hover, and we'll give this a border. We'll give this an opacity of 0.9. So you see, when we reach this small width, the links aren't visible, and the reason is because, remember, we applied a minus 100% positioning to that list, and we never applied this active class, so we gotta have some logic for that, and we'll implement that now. So here we have a class name of navbar list, but what we should do, let's remove this right now, and we should use this menu clicked state. If the menu is clicked, then we'll give it simply the navbar list. Otherwise, we'll give this a navbar list and navbar list active. So basically, when the menu is clicked, we won't show the list because we have a minus 100% positioning, but when it's clicked, we will show it. And there we go. We added responsiveness to our navbar with a OnScroll hover. We also have our hover effect where we hover here and it darkens the opacity. Our last step for responsiveness is to make this part more responsive. What we had here is something like this, which makes it look cleaner when we have a smaller width. So let's go ahead and implement that now. So in our slider CSS, we'll do the same thing where we had at media screen and max width 800 pixels, and we'll just change some styles when this happens. So for the slider, we'll give this a flex direction of column and a background color of, let's give it an RGB. And for the slider image, we'll give this a width of 100%. So the reason here is that by default the flex direction is a row, but when we reach a small width and there's not enough space in that row, we'll make it a column so that it appears, so that the text appears right above or right below the image, and it's not squished side by side. So let's try that. Let's decrease the width, and there we go. We have a fully responsive layout, and this is much cleaner than what we had before. We also just have one little bug we need to fix. So here the X icon shows when the list is not there, and the menu icon shows when the list is actually there, so we should just go ahead and switch that. So let's go into our nav bar, and let's just replace this over here. Cool. So let's see the result. Let's decrease the width, and there we go. That makes more sense. And now we have a nice looking UI that is responsive. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you have any recommendations on things I can improve or other videos you'd like to see, let me know. This is my first YouTube video, so thank you guys again for watching.